Page 21. The first child to receive one was a tough-looking boy in a baseball cap who eagerly grabbed it, looked at the first question, and burst into tears. The girl behind him looked at her test, rubbed her eyes as if they weren't working properly, then looked again. Her head wobbled on her neck. If you begin to feel faint, said the pencil woman, moving on to the next child, place your head between your knees and take deep breaths. If you think you may vomit, please come to the front of the room where a trash can will be provided. Down the row she went, distributing the tests. The crying boy had begun flipping through the test now. There appeared to be several pages, and with each new page his sobs grew louder and more desperate. When he reached the end, he began to wail. I'm afraid loud weeping isn't permitted, said the pencil woman. Please leave the room. The boy, greatly relieved, leapt from his desk and raced to the door, followed at once by two other children who hadn't received the test yet but were too terrified to see it. The pencil woman closed the door. If any others flee the room in panic or dismay, she said sternly, please remember to close the door behind you. Your sobs may disturb the other test takers. She continued handing out the test. Child after child received it with trembling fingers, and child after child, upon looking at the questions, turned pale or red or a subtle shade of green. By the time the pencil woman dropped the pages upon his desk, dread was making Renee's stomach flip like a fish, and for good reason. The questions were impossible. The first one read, the territories of the Naxkavian Autonomous Republic and the Nagorno-Karabakh region are disputed by what two countries? Bhutan, under which the 1865 Treaty of Sinchu ceded borderland to Britain, and Britain, which in exchange provided Bhutan an annual subsidy, under whose influence Bhutan's monarchy was established in 1907. Azerbaijan, Ventatu. Although there were two more answers to choose from, Renee didn't read them. If every question was like this one, he had absolutely no hope of passing. A quick glance at the next few questions did nothing to encourage him. If anything, they got worse. And this was only the first page. All around him, children were shivering, sighing, grinding their teeth. Renee felt like joining them. So much for those special opportunities. Alexis and Jonathan. Alexis, tardy again. Jonathan must have got kicked out. Okay. Back to the orphanage he would go, where no one, not even good Miss Pernomal, knew what to do with him. It had been a nice idea, but apparently he did not have what it took. Hey, let me ask you a question. What were the directions? Do you remember the directions? What did the teacher tell him to do? Read through all the questions, remember? Even so, he wasn't ready to leave. He had yet to follow the directions. And because he was determined not to quit until he had at least tried, he proceeded to follow them now. Dutifully, he wrote his name atop the first page. That was the first step. Well, you've accomplished that much, he thought. The second step was to read all the questions and answers carefully. Renee took a deep breath. There were 40 questions in all. Just reading them would take him most of the hour. It didn't help that the pencil woman now sat eating pickles that were especially crisp, too, as she watched the children struggle. The second question wanted to know where the common vetch originated and to what family it belonged. Renee had no idea what a common vetch was. Anissa is back. What's going on with your guys' Wi-Fi? And the possible answers offered no helpful clue. It might be an antelope, a bird, a rodent, or a vine. Renee went on to the third question, which had to do with subatomic particles called Phenmonians, and an Indian physicist named Satyendra Bose. The fourth question asked which church was built by the Emperor Justinian to demonstrate his superiority in the late Theoc or Gothic successors. On and on the questions went. To his credit, Rene recognized the names of a few places, a few mathematic principles, and one or two important historical figures. But it wouldn't do him any good. He would be lucky to answer a single question correctly, much less all of them. When he was exactly halfway through the test, he was on question 20 regarding the difference between parataxis and hapataxis. Rene heard Rhonda Kizami rise from the desk behind him. Was she already finished? Well, of course, she had all the answers. Rene grimaced in irritation, and as Rhonda stepped forward to turn in her test, the other children gasped in amazement. But the pencil woman seemed not the least bit suspicious. If anything, she was absorbed in Rhonda's bizarre appearance and hardly glanced at the test as she took it. Rene had a sudden insight. Rhonda was calling attention to herself on purpose. It was a trick. No one would suspect her of cheating because who in her right mind would make such a spectacle of herself if she intended to cheat? The green hair, it must be a wig, the poofy dress, the whispering, they were all meant to distract. Most people would assume that if a child intended to cheat, then surely she would call as little attention to herself as possible. Would be as quiet as a mouse, as plain as wallpaper. Rene had to hand it to Rhonda. She might not be smart enough to pass the test, but she was clever enough to get away with cheating on it. He felt a pang of jealousy. Now Rhonda would move on to experience those special opportunities while Rene would mope his way back to the orphanage defeated. As Rhonda passed by him on the way to her desk, she winked and let fall a tiny slip of paper. It drifted down like a feather and settled lightly upon Rene's desk. The test answers. Rene peeked over at the pencil woman, but she hadn't noticed. She was busy grading Rhonda's test now, making checkmark after checkmark and nodding her head. So the answers were indeed the right ones. And here they sat on his desk. If he'd felt tempted before, when he had no idea how hard the test would be, the temptation was nothing compared to now. No matter that he'd resisted, no matter that he'd chosen his seat precisely to avoid this situation, here he was, staring at a slip of paper that contained the key to his hopes. All he had to do was turn it over and look at the answers. The other children were too busy sniffling and biting their fingernails to notice, and if he hurried, he might even copy the answers down before the pencil woman looked up again. She had finished grading Rhonda's paper and was concentrating on the nearly empty jar of pickles, trying to fish out the last one. Rene stared a long moment at the paper, sorely tempted. Then he reached out and flicked it from his desk onto the floor. What good would those opportunities do to him if he wasn't qualified to be given them? And where was the pleasure in cheating? If he couldn't pass the test fairly, he didn't want to pass. He thought this, and mostly believed it, and felt his spirits boosted by the decision. But even so, a few seconds passed before he could tear his eyes from the paper on the floor. All right, he told himself, returning to the test. Get a move on, Rene, and don't look back. There's no time to waste. All right, that's it. They're still just testing, so we're cool. We don't have any more notes. We will definitely have some when he finishes the test. I think hopefully he's going to actually pass it eventually, right? I don't know. We'll see.